Now, listen, I want to talk to you, first of all, about this brilliant stuff done by Talk, which is showing that children are now accounting for over half of all people referred to and supported by the counter-extremism programme Prevent Children. 300 kids under the age of 10 referred to anti-radicalisation schemes. 14 put on tailor-made counter-terror support programmes. What on earth is going on when it's little kiddie? What are these kids looking at? Where are they getting this from?
Well, I don't think it takes enormous amounts of thinking to determine where it's coming from. I mean, talking about these kids, I mean, we're talking down to the ages of 12, where they've had to be intervened on by the authorities, either put on the Prevent programme or specialist programmes obviously developed for them. And I think this is a fundamental thing that comes down to social media. I know everybody says that and everyone blames social media, but you have to look at the propagation of information and the control of information and the filtering of information. And the biggest challenge that we have right now is the fact that everything is unfiltered. You go onto TikTok, and TikTok is probably the worst proponent of it. I mean, for example, I did an interview yesterday that was published by the media agency that interviewed me, and within 30 minutes it had 800,000 viewings. And the problem is that in these times of particularly TikTok, where it's instant, very quick, digestible content, there is very little balance or context that's necessarily given to some of these posts. And anybody with free will can do whatever they want. They can post anything they like. And even though many of these platforms, Meta, TikTok, all the others which are out there, including Twitter, and Elon Musk would have to admit to this, that as much as they try hard to try and control content, there is also the desire to still afford a forum of free speech. But how far does free speech become free speech? And when does it extend beyond that to such a time that when you have an audience which is immature, an audience that's not fully developed, that is still trying to get a grasp of the world? I mean, we think back, from my case, less so for you, Alex, but for me, many years ago, when I was 12, 13, 14 years old, you know, I would have a far cleaner filter of information to be able to digest, understand, comprehend, and then subsequently cascade or disseminate to my friends. With TikTok, it's a simple push of a button, and I can send that to all of my friends, and immediately people can start revolving into it. And I think that the dawn of this came about during the whole COVID pandemic, where understandably people question the government. And as we're seeing right now, many of those conspiracy theories that people subscribe to, that people thought were balmy, actually have come true. So that in itself has created this sort of concerning bench plate or benchmark, if you like, for people to say, right, let's not be closed in our minds, let's be open to ideas, let's be open to suggestions. But then you input on that, and I'm sorry if I'm carrying on too much, Alex, but you take also the peer pressure, and the peer pressure of when you are at those formative years of what your buddies are saying, what your buddies are doing, and for you to not feel excluded. And it is that question of inclusion.
I mean, this is the thing. When it comes to social media, for a long time now, it's been used as a tool to groom people into radicalisation, especially young people. It reminds me, of course, of the amount of people who left the UK to go and fight for ISIS. Looking at all these things that they were putting, the Islamic State were putting online, their fancy videos, making it look like it was some sort of Elysian fields over there, not a war zone. And I have to ask you this. The pro-Palestine marches, it occurred to me that a lot of these must be being cynically used by organisations that are hostile to this country in order to recruit. If you were going to try and come up with a standing army of people that you could radicalise, that you could groom, then a perfect excuse is, oh, look what's happening in Gaza, sign up and come and join us on a march. Then all of a sudden you've got a database of people, frankly, who you can target.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're not being cynical, and it's not suspicion. It is actually happening. It's been proven that foreign state actors have either directly or through proxies utilised platforms like TikTok to basically promote certain agendas and to try and stir up troubles. We've seen this with the riots earlier this year, certainly the stirring up of information which was inaccurately disseminated and circulated about the perpetrator of those attacks, obviously having just got off a boat and was an illegal immigrant. You know, there are many examples, but it's not just people passing this information amongst each other. There are state actors, aggressive, hostile state actors, actively involved in propagating this information. I could tell you about one Hollywood director, I mean, this has been going on for years, who wanted a version of his particular movie. I won't say who it is, but I was talking to a film producer the other day, And he said to me, this movie only got made because he utilised bots in China and in Southeast Asia to basically push out a sentiment from supposed followers saying, we want to see this movie.
Right.
And that was the way he swayed the studio to say, right, we will throw tens of millions at this to reissue this movie as a director's cut.
Blimey,
Yeah.
that's astonishing. I mean, it's interesting. You talk about the riots, you know, interesting statistic. I think it's around 75% of social media activity, the fake news stuff, was from foreign bots and foreign countries. I mean, and you think all these people are thrown in prison apparently because their social media posts provoked a riot, and 75% of the activity wasn't even in the UK.
No, absolutely. I mean, and again, like I said, this has been going on for years. I wrote a book a few years ago, which was specifically for parents, and it was very well sort of received, and it was for parents to help them identify the problems that their children might be experiencing, whether it be radicalisation, whether it be grooming, all sorts of potential threats. And one of the things the publisher said to me was, you know, I said, what age group do you want me to cover on this? And they said, well, we want to cover 7 to 17 years old. And I went, you're kidding me. And they went, why? And I said, well, between 7 and 13, it's about best practice. From 13 to 17, it's crisis management, because it's gone beyond that stage. And friends of mine in the specialist cyber world and sort of involved in hacking, both ethical and otherwise, you know, they are identifying individuals at the age of 13 who are really sophisticated in their hacking capabilities.
Gosh.
So it's very different to when we were young, that you have a receptive audience that's being force-fed to a certain degree information which isn't necessarily accurate, which has been distorted, which has been influenced by hostile state actors, where they're taking that information and they're putting back some very intelligent arguments, which then again on peer pressure propagates it even further. We're in a really, really dangerous times.
Talking about dangerous times, let's talk about what is going on in Syria. I'd never heard of Hayat Tahrir al-Sham until about a week ago, apparently an offshoot of Al-Qaeda, who I know have had a bit of a makeover. They're back and bigger than before under Osama bin Laden's son. But what is going on in Syria? Because this is sort of, to me, a fairly new organisation, but there's all these sort of bits and bobs going on everywhere. There could be a resurgence of ISIS in the east. You've still got American troops there. You've got Russia having a port on the Mediterranean coast, and are they going to be able to come to Assad's aid? But it's all happening very quickly. Give us the latest and try and explain to us what quite is happening.
OK, so HTS, not relatively new. They've been around certainly since about 2012, where they were initially formulated by Islamic State. Then they left Islamic State and pledged allegiance about a year later to Al-Qaeda. After that time, they then became their own entity and sort of distanced themselves from Al-Qaeda, but have very, very similar radical beliefs. And HTS is the largest of 5 separate militant groups operating in Syria against Bashar Assad's regime, as obviously the president of the country. And they are fighting for liberation. And they are making some serious groundswell and taking a lot of ground in terms of some of the cities that they're taking in the northwestern districts of Syria. You also have involved in this equation Turkey, who are supporting HTS. Now, although they're saying they're not directly involved, you then have this ambiguity of the PKK, which is the Kurdish Liberation Front, who are also involved and inputting. You have the US, as you say, in the far bottom sort of southeast region. You have the borders, which are incredibly porous, so you have foreign fighters coming in. You know, it's such a mess down there. But what they're trying to do is basically depose Bashar Assad as the leader of the country.
Now, at one point, we kind of wanted Assad gone, didn't we? But what would happen if Assad falls? What goes on in Syria then? Who's in charge?
You're going to see, I mean, you know, I may get this drastically wrong, as I often do, but you're going to see a very similar situation to what we saw in Libya when Gaddafi got taken out. Now, the problem with Libya right now, although it's trying to get back to some kind of democracy, you have various different factions, including Islamic State, who are running various parts of Libya. And Libya is an incredibly dangerous and volatile country. You know, of countries around the world, and having spent time myself in Iraq and Afghanistan and various other war zones, Libya is probably last on my list of places to necessarily go right now because it's very difficult to move around. We'll see the same potentially happening in Syria. We already do in certain regions, and it's certainly not advisable to go down there at this current time. But what we're going to see is a constant and ongoing clash between what was originally the Free Syrian Army, who are still involved in this fight, who are part of this coalition, if you like, of these 5 different groups. They are the first group that I came into contact with, and they were very good, but then they got, and they were well-intentioned, but then they got infiltrated by al-Nusra Front, and al-Nusra Front was obviously financed by al-Qaeda. So the whole region is a real mess, Alex, and I mean, and it would take us an awful lot to go through it. But then you have the influence of Afghanistan, where the Taliban is facilitating the training camps, about 30-odd training camps for al-Qaeda and also for ISIS-K. And I think we've got a dangerous year ahead of us next year.
Yeah, I think you're right, actually. Well, on that happy note, let's